where it really started was on the Bitcoin side. But I think like many others, myself started to explore, I think, just every sort of thing other than Bitcoin, every sort of other type of shitcoin out there. I think stumbled onto Ethereum, had some fun there, started to explore a number of other blockchains as well. And then, back in 2020 or so is when I actually started really working, I would say, in crypto post college, on the centralized exchange side, decentralized exchange side, and then more recently on the venture side, um, all in crypto. And I think, as we went into this sort of new year of 2023, post FTX collapse, I was ultimately looking, I think, for, really, I think what was really next. I think I had sort of been searching around, people are like, oh, maybe what's next is like Sui. Maybe what's next is some of these other, sort of alt L1s, and I wasn't particularly convinced. Although I think found Sui and some of these other newer layer ones to be interesting, it just didn't seem to have sort of any legs, at least right now. Maybe they will in the future. Um, but I think as time went on, I continued to look. What would happen was about three, really maybe less than 3 months or a little over 3 months ago, I would see, of course, Magic Eden launch on the sort of timeline on Bitcoin. As soon as I saw that, I was really instantly intrigued. I would then, of course, go to the website. It would say, connect wallet, and it would push me to connect with the Xverse wallet. And as soon as I saw those two experiences really, sort of coupled, to me, it was there was something really here. Um, I think when you think about Bitcoin, you don't think about this type of experience. Both Magic Eden and Xverse that are incredibly similar to anything like Solana, with of course Magic Eden and Phantom. And so to me, it was like there's obviously something here. That was around 350,000 sort of level inscriptions. I think at that time as well, I had no intentions of really building. My intentions were really just to collect, connect, have fun, see what was out there, see what was different about ordinals, and continued to sort of get deeper and deeper, and felt that I was in one of the best positions, I think, to really build something, and had, I think, some of the best intentions as well. So that's ultimately some of my backstory, some of the history, and how we are, how we got here today.
Awesome, awesome. Yeah, it's good to hear. Like, just it's always good to hear like how people end up where they are. I came in through crypto through Dogecoin. Little fun fact back in 2020. So seeing that journey for people is always interesting. So thanks for sharing. I'll throw it over to any of the co-hosts to see if they have any comments or questions before I move on. All right. So yeah, so then you're here, and you took crypto Twitter by storm with OXBT, BRC-20s. What is and then this is all part of Redacted. So you guys call yourselves the Bitcoin culture. You're defined by Bitcoin culture. So what exactly is this ecosystem, and what are you doing right now with OXBT and Redacted?
Yeah, so I think really, really, it's best to really sort of separate the two, right? I really sort of, I think, launched or founded both, right? So on one side you have OXBT, which is really sort of an ecosystem and community token. You can see in that sort of ecosystem or community a bunch of different things, right? One is a number of different experiments, right? So I think we did sort of the first ever sort of raffles in a BRC-20 with OXBT a couple weeks ago. That was with myself and Gen Zero, and then we should be going live with the first ever auctions in a BRC-20 next week, as well with Gen Zero. And I think there's a number of other things that we're exploring on, I guess that we're sort of exploring on the community side as well. I know that there's been so many people that have reached out and like, hey, can we do this with OXBT, can we do that? There's even someone in the audience that sort of reached out to do a luxury vacation in OXBT. So there's a number of different things that I think people would love to sort of bring more utility into the sort of community of OXBT, and we're totally open to it. And also, like, there's a lot of stuff that's happening in OXBT that, of course, we don't control, right, or that I don't control. And so that's, I think, what's really interesting on the OXBT side. Expect next week for both OXBT as well as Redacted a large announcement. And then, so that's sort of both OXBT, or I'm sorry, that's OXBT. Then Redacted is what ultimately Redacted is a collective sort of team, myself, Lynn, and a few others, right? And Redacted is really bringing art and culture to Bitcoin. And why I think that's sort of important is I think that we would really like to build a digital identity system on Bitcoin. And so on, sort of next week or in next week, we're planning on sort of releasing what that actually entails, what that sort of means, what you can expect from us over, the coming months or really potential years. And then also discussing a little bit how we're currently looking at how, of course, OXBT is involved in that. And so that's ultimately what these two things are, right? You have sort of Redacted, which is sort of a brand, as well as really bringing art and culture to Bitcoin. You have OXBT, which is really a community and an ecosystem token on Bitcoin.
Yeah, that's great points. Any questions or comments, Dal or Brooke or Tammy?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Dal.
Okay. I'll chime in with just a question, because I think on one hand, right, and I said that in context, I think most people know I'm a ETH maxi or maximalish, right? So obviously everything I say, you have to take it with some bias, obviously. But I do applaud the idea and the effort to build on top of Bitcoin, right? I think that's been too long, right? That there wasn't a culture around builders to actually add value or add utility in the Bitcoin ecosystem. So just before I say anything, that's the first thing, right? I applaud that. But as most people know, I have a little bit of a reticence. I'm not even trying to pronounce that word anymore. But my question, we don't have to get super technical, but when it comes to building on top of Bitcoin, right? Do you feel like there are the sufficient standard, or do you feel like it's still a work in progress? Because when people hear BRC-20, they assume that it's going to work and behave the same way as the ERC-20 or the way it behaves on Solana or what have you. Like, just a token that's easy to send, that has some utility and functionality, smart contract. Like, you get where I'm going with that, right? And so I'm not super familiar with the BRC-20 ecosystem, but so I wonder if you can kind of touch on, when you compare that ecosystem with other chain, do you feel like it's there as well? It provides the same or similar utility, or you feel like there's still some work to be done, and do you see that work being done?
Oh man, it's definitely not up to par with ERC-20, and arguably BRC-20s are pretty counterintuitive. I think the only thing that they probably have in common is the sort of name, right, or similar name. That's about the only thing they have in common. I think because of how you have to interact with Bitcoin, if you want to be on the layer one, right? Of course, if you want to go on stacks, you want to go on some of these layer twos, it's much different. But if you want to be on the layer one, you're really limited, I think, with as far as the standards go. And so I think, to your question, there is absolutely a lot that needs to be done, I think, for BRC-20s to be up to par with anything similar to ERC-20, right? Like, there's so many different things you could do on both ERC-20 as well as SPL, right? The sort of token standards that are so much easier to do, um, of course, on both ETH and Solana, that you just can't do easily or really almost at all sometimes on BRC20, right? Like a simple burn function, you can't do that with BRC20, right? The only way to burn is to send to a dead wallet, right? Which has been, for the most part, Satoshi Nakamoto's wallet. So that in itself, like just that sort of thing is kind of funny when you think about the comparisons. I think that you know, to some of the other points. So yes, I will agree that you know, sort of BRC20 is pretty inferior to ERC20. Um, but ultimately, I think the way we look at it is we want to be, you know, I guess myself, I really want to be a part of the driving force behind pushing, you know, these sort of token standards forward, right? Whether that is BRC20 or a different standard that's pushed, I do believe that there needs to be a fungible token standard on Bitcoin, right? And there's been about probably, I don't know, 10 to 20 different standards that have been proposed. Of course, the one with the most traction, you know, most volumes, I think most usage is BRC20. But who knows how long that, of course, lasts, right? I think that we're still in the very, very early days of fungible token. I think that you know, it was built on March 9th, right? The launch of BRC20 was built on March 9th. So that's what, 4 months or so into of course the actual, you know, launch and usage and you know, trading and so I think that there's a lot of feedback that people have given. Maybe there'll be updates that help BRC20 in the long run, but it's still very, very early and honestly, it needs a lot of work.
Yeah, I love to hear that, and I'm sure Nico and the audience also love to hear the word standard. So thank you for that answer. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I know for months, like that was your biggest criticism of what was being built on Bitcoin, that you wanted there to be some type of standard that could be uniform across, you know, the network. So yeah, I think that's it's great to hear that, you know, that's the direction that you're hoping to look for. And then I guess with that, you know, given the reason limitations, maybe let's talk about the recent announcement. Is that the reason why maybe you decided to go this route of with the Emblem Finance, and maybe talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think to the Emblem Vault, you know, the Emblem Vault sort of integration, that I think is to more of the sort of trading side, as well as again the experiment side. I think that as you know, myself, both at OXBT and sort of at Redacted, um, I'm trying to push um, everyone to be, I think, experimenting as much as possible, right? Not just on sort of OXBT, but I think everyone in the BRC20 on the ordinal side. This is the only way that people can move forward in an ecosystem, right? And whether you know you're experimenting or not, it helps. I think everyone in the long run. So this is something I've been pushing in particular with OXBT is, you know, sort of experimenting with as much basically as possible, right? As limited as we are experimenting with it. And so I think also looking at the different potential options OXBT could have gone with, you know, going to ETH. You could have done wrapping, you could have done bridging, you could have done something other than of course what we did with the vaults. But ultimately all that other stuff, right? And even like synthetics, you know, it increases the supply. It gets really confusing around what the hell is going to happen if you are a holder. It's a mess. And so looking at what Emblem Vault ultimately does, I think solves some of those problems, right? And there's no supply increase, there's no supply decrease. What it is, right, is the simplest form of it is just literally inside of a vault, inside of an Emblem Vault for OXBT or Ordi, um, is at least on the OXBT side, 2,000 of OXBT, right? There can never be more or less than 2,000 OXBT inside of one vault, right? And as soon as that is created, you can then, of course, trade that on ETH. If you want as well, there is coming soon loans, right? So you can take out a loan eventually on OXBT as well. I believe, with X2Y2. And I'm sure maybe some other platforms will come to the table as well. But then, of course, if you no longer want to have your assets on ETH, you can go back to Emblem Vault. You can unvault it, right? And that specific vault, which is, of course, an NFT or sort of ERC 721 contract, will be burned, right? And again, so no supply is sort of hurt or deprecated because of this, and you can sort of go freely between both ETH and Bitcoin. And I think that over time, I'm generally very confident that the trading experience will get better on both the layer one of Bitcoin as well as the layer twos. But in the meantime, I think again, like, we need to be experimenting with this stuff, and I think that Emblem Vault has come up with a really really amazing product that I hope has some sort of traction, and just looking forward to it. That just went live, I think, yesterday, about 12 hours ago or so. And so keen to see the data, I think, going forward.
I'll throw it over to you guys in a second. Just a real quick question from a technical perspective, just, at a more high level, what exactly is the vault? Is it just like, how is that happening? Is it a smart contract in Ethereum, and how is that taken care of on the Bitcoin side to account for those OXBT being in that vault?
Yeah. So, I mean, that's the thing, right? Is inside of that vault, it is its own smart contract, right? It's an ERC 721 a contract, which is an NFT contract, right? Which is why you see on where it's being traded, right? Is Blur, is OpenSea, right? Is NFT marketplaces, not most likely not Uniswap, unless someone wants to wrap it. I think that'd be kind of crazy, but that's probably something we won't support. But or I guess I won't support. I think that of course, what's inside of that vault, though, is a taproot address, right? Or a Bitcoin taproot address that was created specifically for this vault. So that's what I was saying is you can go sort of freely between ETH and Bitcoin, because what you do is you go back to the Emblem Vault website, and what you of course get is the private keys, right? You get private keys, which is access to that taproot address, right? Which then gives you the ability to of course have that 2,000 OXBT, and then of course you can do whatever you would like with it, back on Bitcoin. So again, there's no sort of supply or supply increase or decrease. What's inside of that vault is a taproot address, right? The same thing that we interact with every single day on Bitcoin with Xverse or Unisat or whatever wallet you frequently use.
Makes sense. Thanks for the breakdown. Yeah, I'm trying to wrap this all around my head because
I know.
Right? Go ahead, Brooke.
That's always been like my question for a lot of the like ordinal people, and having been in Bitcoin so long, like, how are you tackling this? Like, this is a lot, right? Like, for people who maybe just got into crypto, or they've just been kind of like, flipping NFTs, and it's kind of a two-part, like, what I just would love to know how you're tackling that. Like, I see your threads, like, we follow each other, like I've watched what you guys have been doing kind of like in the shadows. And I also am really like interested in how your audience, like your community has like gathered around this, but like really educating people on like, what the fuck are you even talking about, kind of thing. Like, what is it? Like, why are all these things redacted? And so it's just interesting to me. That's the first part of the question. And then I've always been fascinated by the fact that like the community has adopted BRC, when that like literally stands for request for comment, and like that's not in the Bitcoin technology. So is it like that was just like picked out of the air because it like matched up, and it was like easier for people to understand because they were coming over from Ethereum? So yeah, there's two-part question. Go for it.
Yeah. I think to start with the second one, I think the way I've heard sort of Domo speak to it, right, was, and even if you go to the docs of BRC20, he sort of states, this stuff will be worthless. Do not sort of play around with this. Of course, that wasn't the case, right? Especially with the first ever BRC-20 that was deployed, which was Ordi, which has had the most sort of volumes and sort of activity since the launch of it. I think I think of course like the naming was of course done in mind, sort of kept in his head, probably to do with ERC-20, of course. I think that's there's no doubt there. But I think that when you look at, of course, the differences between BRC-20 and ERC-20, it's the contrast. The contrasts are pretty stark. So that's sort of the first piece. I think to further that, I don't know exactly, what maybe. Well, actually, I don't know. My sort of thesis on maybe why BRC-20s took off more than maybe any other standard, although at that time there was really no other standard for fungible tokens, was because of Unisat, right? Unisat enabled people to easily mint this stuff, easily deploy it. And then, of course, more recently, I think with the past 1 to 2 months, of course, somewhat easily trade it, right? And I think that little integration from Unisat, probably about a month after, the inventions, probably early April, the invention of BRC-20 is what has, I think, made it take off so much. I think, though, in the future, we'll have to see other catalysts that ultimately bring BRC-20s, I think, more adoption in general, right? And so I think that it's still very, very early, right? As we're 4 months in, what has sort of happened since then, right? Unisat now supports, of course, many of the same sort of functions. You can deploy, you can mint, you can do all that sort of stuff. Supposedly they're supposed to be working on maybe some sort of launch pad for BRC-20s as well, just like Luminex and others. Supposedly, there's other potential sort of standards they're working on as well. They of course have the marketplace, which I think has probably done some of the most volumes of any sort of marketplace on the ERC or the BRC-20 side. So that's that. And I think then to your second question, yeah, I think that to the redacted piece, I think that where we started with that, right, was probably over redacting too much. I think we've learned our lesson a bit there. But also at the same time, Redacted has ultimately become our brand, right? Like Redacted is now, I think probably somewhat similar to something like, sort of Yuga maybe, or sort of like D Labs, right? That is sort of what overlooks, I think, a lot of what we'll be doing. And so I think that people are still confused a bit on that. Next week, we plan on sort of announcing a bit on, ultimately what Redacted is and what we're going to be doing, right? What are our plans? And so that's what I'm looking forward to next week. But I think to your question and your point, absolutely. I think that we've heard the feedback on, we need to unredact shit. We did some of that, especially in the Discord, and are working to, I think, do a lot more of that. I think just be more on the transparent side rather than some, more heavily on the mystery side, which is something we're still trying to keep as well.
But I mean, that does it for people, right? Like that's what humans like, is the, like, what is this? It's the
I know.
The when, the classic one. No, but I mean,
the when or the Gibbs.
Yeah, the one. But at the end of the day, like, it's been 3 months. I know in crypto time it feels like 3 years, but the ecosystem that's been built in such a short time frame, like, it's huge. And I see, Adam, you came up and had your hand up. So did you want to chime in?
Yeah, I just wanted to actually add, thanks for having me up, by the way. Just to add, I think one of the reasons why BRC-20s took off was just the way it integrated this idea of this like truly free mint where basically like BitGod or somebody could, you know, Domo who released the first one, Ordi, when he released it or deployed it, you could literally go and mint it for free, right? It was whatever the inscription cost, $1 or whatever. But the idea of this like super fair mint, I think, you know, people are naturally attracted to that. And obviously it caused a huge amount of volume on Ordinals as people minted out all these various different coins. But I just wanted to state that if people were wondering, well, why would people kind of ape into these things? The idea of this like free mint and very, very fair mint was very, very attractive to users, I believe.
Yeah, that was a great point. And just real quick, because I know Brooke has more question, but who would you say is adopting the BRC-20s? Is it typical Bitcoiners, or is it almost like Web3 people coming from other chain excited that you guys are building on Bitcoin?
Sorry, could you maybe ask that question again? I think it went cut out
Yeah,
for myself.
if so, just curious about like who is obviously it's both, right? My question is like, if you look at the community of people that are adopting BRC-20s, collecting them, or even the ordinals, if you had to pick one group, is it mostly Bitcoiners who've been around and we kind of come around this idea of building on top of Bitcoin, or is it more Web3 people that maybe came from Ethereum, from Solana, from other ecosystem, and just really excited to see similar utility being brought onto Bitcoin?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, I think for both BRC-20s and ordinals, I think the majority of people that are creating, um, that are collecting, I think that are building, for the most part, are from really other blockchains, right? I think most likely, you know, really ETH and Sol as of course some of the biggest. Um, I think that like there's probably been some Bitcoin maxis that have you know done some ordinal stuff, but I'd say the majority is just very very early adopters, right? That come from you know both the ETH and Soul side. I'll also say though, I think that some of the more or some of the earlier builders came from really two places, right? One was Bitcoin SV, and the other was you know Stacks, right? That's where you saw I think some of the earliest builders, right? From people like Xverse, from people who else? You know, like OrdSwap. They're from Bitcoin SV, Ordinals Wallet, I believe, as well. You know, a lot of these different sort of really, I think, key early builders are from, you know, those two places. But I would say the majority of people really here are really from ETH and Sol. And I think you also, you know, one of the main things to this point as well is you look at you know the mint of OXBT. I think that was you know a really interesting sort of onboarding event from a number of other blockchains, but in particular, there was two I think communities that really stood out that were involved in that, and I think that was really, of course, the DGods, and the other was Azuki's, right, which are both from ETH now. Probably still have at least on the DGod side some following from Sol. So I think that's I think what I believe is probably the sort of demographic here.
Yeah, I think if
Maybe Adam
yeah,
can
I
speak
would
to that
just
as well.
layer on it kind of from a historical perspective. You know, Udi did that Twitter Spaces with Vitalik last night, which was amazing, and I encourage you to go listen to if you missed it. But just to kind of put in historical context, you know, Vitalik started Ethereum basically because he was driven off of Bitcoin. The Bitcoin maxis really drove off building back in, you know, 2015, 16, and 17. They made it very clear that building was not going to be permissible on Bitcoin. Bitcoin was money and that's it. And I think what Ordinals did was respark this interest kind of in the mother chain that it's cool to build on Bitcoin again. And I think that brought all these people back from Ethereum, Sol, and where have you, to just like who were building on other chains because they were rejected from Bitcoin, weren't allowed to build on Bitcoin, and said, wait a minute, we can do this again. let's give it another shot. Bitcoin is more, or can be more than simply, digital cash. Let's build again on Bitcoin. And I think that got people tremendously excited.
That was, oh, okay. Thank you. That was my question from earlier. And Dow, that was a great question. That is what I wanted to ask. If you see more acceptance from the Bitcoin maxis, because when I came in, I obviously have seen the shift. I came in around the same time as Jess. Dogecoin brought me in, but I did get a dose of that Bitcoin maximalist environment, and it was quite the turnoff. But I was just curious. Obviously, I came in and I learned and got into Bitcoin, into Ethereum and other things. But I was just curious if you have seen a shift in those really hardcore maxis, like accepting it and going to the thought of building on Bitcoin.
I don't think you're ever going to turn the hardcores. But I think, the hardcores are just a very, very small portion of Bitcoiners. Like I pretty much guarantee everybody in this space, to some degree, considers themselves a Bitcoiner, right? And I don't think you're ever going to, change those like super hardcore Bitcoiners. But look, the reality is that super deep core is probably 200 people. The rest of us, and I think I've talked to lots of hardcore Bitcoiners, the vast majority of them are completely fine with ordinals, completely fine. And they actually recognize the more useful Bitcoin is, the more valuable their bags of Bitcoin are. And at the end of the day, they recognize that. So while they may take a hardcore stand and not like it kind of publicly, when you get them private in a one-on-one conversation, they're all for Bitcoin being used in lots of new and interesting ways. That's just my view, but that's what I've seen talking to Bitcoiners one-on-one.
Yeah, the maxis are going to maxi, but great comments. And I just wanted to go back to Vitalik's comments yesterday. And just in this discussion, we've heard a lot about, builders, this builders culture coming back to Bitcoin. So just a few quotes that he says. Ordinals brings back a culture of actually doing things. Which was an interesting quote. Also, real pushback to the laser eyes, which is good. That was probably my favorite. And he also said, ordinals, there's some type of organic return of builders culture, that people just want to try out things and experiment. And because in my opinion, a lot of what we've been seeing on the Ethereum side, it's been a lot of just copy pasta. Like, are there, like, the majority of people are copy pasting? There's a minimal group of builders that are actually trying different things. And I think trying to build on Bitcoin, it's like forcing people to try different things, in my personal opinion. But I'll throw it over to anybody else.
Yeah,
I like. Oh, go for it.
No, I was just going to say, I liked the conversation between Udi and Vitalik. I think that what you're, my general thesis is that what you're going to see over the next 1 to 2 years with the, just with the invention of ordinals is, I think, a sort of Cambrian explosion, right, of people trying to experiment, of people trying to build really rich dApps on the layer one, as well as solutions to the glaring problems that we've seen over these past couple months, really, with sort of network fees being so high. 500 sats per vbyte is absolutely crazy, and I don't think that anyone at those sort of levels can inscribe high quality art. Not that they can't, it's just it's not necessarily economical. And if you want to sort of like trade BRC-20s and you want to be involved in anything on the layer one, it just becomes a huge hassle. So I think that what you're going to see over the next couple of years is again, like, I think people that are willing to experiment on Bitcoin like it's never sort of been done before, because of the invention of ordinals. And you're already seeing it, right? You're already seeing it with you have sort of omnisats that's coming out soon, which is a native, Bitcoin layer one BRC-20 swap. You have, something like Liquidium, right? That's doing Ordinals, borrow lending. These are just sort of basic building blocks, in my opinion, to really any ecosystem that are just being built now on Bitcoin. These are things I think that we really take for granted on every other chain, but is not here yet, right? Like Uniswap and Aave and Compound. These are all things that are so easy now on ETH and other chains, but of course are not here yet in Bitcoin. And I think that those are just the start. There's people trying to build games, etc. So I'm looking forward to this next year and more.
Awesome. Go ahead, Dom.
Yeah, I absolutely love what Vitaly said. I didn't listen to the space, unfortunately. I'd love to listen to it over the weekend, but I thought that was very diplomatic of him. And from what you guys just said, right, that obviously he got kicked off of building on top of Bitcoin because of the BTC maxis, right? Not necessarily because of the average Bitcoiner who probably didn't know about those conversations, but a small group of BTC maxis who kind of hijacked, in my opinion, my humble opinion, hijacked a little bit of theory and the philosophy behind Bitcoin. This was a low-key way for him to say, y'all can kick rocks, right? In a polite way, in a Vitalik way, this was what he was saying. I'm translating Vitalik talk, and that's saying BTC maxis, kick rocks. We have builders on Bitcoin, and he's excited for it. And I think everybody in the space is excited for it long term because we understand that it's a blue ocean. We don't have to compete DeFi protocol per DeFi protocol. If BTC wins, then it's a win for the whole space. So just to wrap a mind around what's going on in Bitcoin, right? As far as I'm aware, right, there's Lightning Network. There's obviously the BRC-20s, the Ordinals, the Stacks. There's also, I think, Eric Wall, who's working on a ZKP. So BitGod, like when you look at the future, let's say the next 6 months. Obviously, you mentioned that most of it is really new, right? Especially like the Ordinals is like since March, right? What do you see happening? Like, how does all those different building pieces, do they fit together, or do they each have their own philosophy as to where Bitcoin should go? Or what's your overall vision for the future of the Bitcoin ecosystem?
I mean, I think that at the end of the day, what drives people to of course build on top of something or build anything in general is economics, right? With the sort of prospect of making a return on your time invested into building something, right? And so what that means is probably going to have people are going to be looking out for the most part their own interests. Unfortunately, right? I wish that it was obviously not like that, but that's I think how humans at the end of the day just sort of interact. And I think we've already seen that to some extent, right? Like the Ordinals wallet guys, they've been hinting at some stuff here and there for a while, right? Of like trying to figure out either getting back to Bitcoin SV or sort of figuring out a solution to this of course problem on the network fee side. And so I don't think it's sort of a stretch to think that they'll eventually try and push their own sort of narratives on Bitcoin, as well as just sort of any other companies in this space that have maybe been somewhat successful, right? To push people to different sort of solutions that they believe are more viable or more valuable to Bitcoiners. That's just, I think, a product of being in any ecosystem is people are generally looking out for their own interests, not necessarily that of the underlying L1, unfortunately. But that, of course, is what makes a market, right? That makes sort of capitalism or sort of like the free markets. And of course, if there's mutual interests, right? Just like we, of course, or sort of OXBT, of course, went cross-chain with Vault. There was mutual interest there, right? Like they've built an amazing product that, of course, OXBT can now, use or sort of be traded on, both ETH and Bitcoin. in a mutually beneficial way, right? To both OXBT as well as Emblem Vault, the company. So that's, I think, an example of sort of like the free market there, where mutual interests lie.
Great question, Dow. Adam, I see you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think, in a lot of ways, I actually love that individuals kind of look out for their self-interest, because I realize that, it's probably going to be an individual or a couple people building something in a garage or a virtual garage that creates the kind of like next NFT boom of 2021. I think when you look historically, like NFTs were around for years before that, right? And even though they had a little bit of a fit and start with CryptoKitties back in 2017, the real boom didn't happen until 2021. And I think what I get so excited about when we say, quote unquote building, is that all this infrastructure is now ready, which like just hasn't been there. And so for anybody listening right now, if you have an idea to do something that you think is crazy or stupid, like now's the time. Like, don't wait. The infrastructure's here on all of these crypto networks. Obviously myself, my team at Emblem Vault, we're excited about all these cross-chain opportunities, being able to trade your NFTs and move your NFTs around to every chain, every asset on every chain, available everywhere all the time. That's what we're kind of all about. But how people are going to use those is the thing that excites me, right? Not that you can, buy BRC-20s on Ethereum, but what can you do with them on Ethereum, and what can you do with them on Bitcoin, and how can it go back and forth, and is that part of an ecosystem? These are the things that are really exciting to me. And so yeah, I'm just excited for what the next person builds, that takes us to that next level. Because for me, it is really about what's that, like, I go back to Web 2, what's that killer app that takes the space to the next 10, 20, 30 million people, the normies, what's going to get them interested in crypto. And I think we've seen that obviously with NFTs did that, but what's that next thing that's going to get people excited? And the infrastructure's here. Just somebody has to build that next cool thing.
I think that was part of, I don't know how to like put this into like coherent thoughts, but how do you, I kind of understand how the Bitcoin maxis, like I'm a disruptive technologist, so I just love all of it, like regardless. I'm not a maximalist on anything, but just like, good vibes. No, I'm kidding. I don't know why I said that, but I can understand that, like, whenever we start saying like we're building on something, well, a lot of people that have kind of been around for a while, just in the technology sense, is like, well, we were already kind of building, right, with improvement proposals, and but that was just like super super technical code that isn't sexy, just like Ethereum and all of that just wasn't sexy. It wasn't even sexy when CryptoKitties came along, and there was like these historical NFTs. So I agree. This isn't really a question, I'm just kind of throwing it out there. Like, I agree that it's easier to onboard more people, because look at what happened when all these, JPEGs came about and they could trade, and there was more in it for people. And I truly believe in that, like, mechanics of human behavior is like, what is in it for them? How is this going to benefit their life? And, back in the day, Bitcoin and like making improvements to the network wasn't like widely cool. So I get it, and I'm on board. I just always kind of think it's interesting. Like, I get the other side of it. Like, this has kind of always been a thing. We've always been building on top of the next thing. We've disrupted the next thing, and now it's just another iteration of what what was already happening. I don't know. I kind of see that in the system.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
I feel what you're saying, and there's almost like two levels of building, right? There's the developers who are building these protocols and the tools and the wallets that we use and making it easy for us. And then there's the actual stuff that brings people in. Like, all of that doesn't mean crap if it doesn't give me something fun to use or interesting to use or something that makes me money, right? It's like, that's what I'm excited about, because what I'm excited about there is like two people with some gumption can build something that is transformative. And I'll give you an example of one that didn't work, but that could be built today and may actually be transformative. In 2016 and 17, Adam B. Levine, who is, you probably know him from the Let's Talk Bitcoin podcast, obviously very famous Bitcoiner. He built something called Tokenly, which was basically a gated access community where
I remember that. I
so,
remember till just
so
now.
you talk about something that, dude, if you launch something like that today and it caught fire, like it's the type of thing that could overtake YouTube. Like it was literally a content platform where you got paid in the native token, depending on how well your blog post or podcast did. I mean, like something like this, which is Web3 native, where creators get paid or get compensated or are rewarded natively. Like he was building that in 2016. It was way too early, right? It's infinitely easier to build that today. Like you could build that in a week today. Something like that. That's what I'm talking about. Like what's going to be the next something like that, which hits and 100 million people join. Like that's what I'm excited about. When I say building, I'm excited about building on ordinals and all that sort of stuff. It's like that's just like foundational layer, right? It doesn't move the needle. What moves the needle really is people making interesting projects which move us into like a Web3 future. Like that's my vision, and that's some of you may disagree, but that's kind of how I feel about it.
No, just to respond to that too, like I love bringing up that I don't know, maybe it's like back in the day with like the internet, the .com boom. I worked on the Y2K bug. Yeah, I'm old. And I just remember like during that .com boom, the companies like I forget the name of it, but it was like grocery delivery, and it completely failed. But yet that set the tone. Like people have to do this to move the industry forward. And I just always think like all of the Bitcoin building that's been going on for the last 10 years, we want to like, respect our elders sort of. So, but I love these like historical, stories and that kind of stuff.
Great points, guys. And we are coming up at the top of the hour, and I do want to be respectful of BitGod's time, but I do want to say anything. Like for me, I think that moment was when I saw Peter Schiff capitulate. Like if you guys don't know who Peter Schiff is, this guy hates fucking Bitcoin. And when I saw that he did an ordinal, I was like, okay, what? That changed it for me. I was like, okay, this something like that was my turning point. What do you think about that, BitGod?
That's what's so crazy, right? Is I think he was on a space like a week or two ago, and he was like, "I still hate Bitcoin" or something like that, or "I still don't believe in Bitcoin, but I believe in art being secured, I guess, on Bitcoin." But I mean, just the thing that's so crazy and sort of funny about that is if you are an ordinals creator, right? If you are selling ordinals to someone else, you are a Bitcoiner, right? You are, most likely, whether it's him or his team, right? They are paying money to inscribe these images on Bitcoin Forever. He is accepting Bitcoin as a payment, right? And most likely using some sort of OTC, to I guess get US dollars if that's what he wants, right? From his Bitcoin he just earned. So he's using Bitcoin throughout the whole process. What's so funny, right, is he could probably, I mean, he's probably just taking advantage of the ordinals boom in general, right? Because he could probably sell that art, not through Bitcoin, but he's chosen to do that. And I think that's just what's in general so funny about him doing it is you are a Bitcoiner if you're doing ordinals. It's involving Bitcoin to secure the network, to inscribe, it's I don't know, it's funny.
Love it. Yeah. Any last comments or questions for BitGod or actually BitGod, I'll turn it over to you. What's coming that you said there's a bunch of announcements coming over next week. What are you excited about that's coming to the Bitcoin ecosystem?
Yeah, I mean, we're looking forward to. It's not like a bunch of announcements. It's really just one, or I guess it's really two. One is on the OXBT side, and the other is on the Redacted side, right? And on the Redacted side, what that is really what we're going to be doing over the next months, hopefully years, if not even more than that. Lynn sort of says the next 100 years, which I think is the goal. But of course, who knows if we'll be alive then. That's what we're ultimately working on the Redacted side. Then I think what am I looking forward to in the Bitcoin ecosystem? I think the recursive inscriptions is really interesting. I'm looking forward to seeing a lot more people experiment around that.
Wait, what is that? What is that?
Recursive inscriptions. The best way, I guess, I would describe the recursive side of things is if you have an image, right? You can think of sort of an image that's any sort of like PFP that has layers to that image. One thing you can do with recursive, of course, inscription is inscribe all of those layers, right? Build then a generator to bring those layers together to build your image, reducing the cost to inscribe on, of course, Bitcoin by 10 to 100x. Other things you can do are HTML. You can do games now as well. You could already do that, but I think in a much easier, sort of better way. Adam, I don't know if you have any other thoughts on, sort of what else you can do with recursive as well, but it was, I think, released 1 to 2 weeks ago or so. And I think is just now being sort of experimented with.
Yeah, again, this is another thing that just think of. I know we tend to think really simply and say, oh, ordinals are just new NFTs on Bitcoin, but it's much more than that. It's a whole data layer, and so this is the recursive kind of way of looking at it. Like BitGod was just saying, is like how can you stack or layer data on Bitcoin to make it much more efficient. And so I'd say if you're looking for somebody to follow who's an expert, just punch in OCM for On-Chain Monkey and Danny. If you hit the search bar for that, Danny from On-Chain Monkey is kind of the leader in the space, really the thought leader who's bringing this forward, which is just how can we use ordinals in the most efficient way possible so as to not, as good Bitcoiners, to not clog the blockchain as much as possible. So yeah, I hope that makes sense.
Go ahead, Dal.
Yeah, just quick question. I'm going to play devil's advocate. Or actually, I'm going to ask you guys to play devil's advocate. Is there any argument that you guys hear from the BTC maxis that is somewhat reasonable or convincing as to why not build on top of Bitcoin?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's reasonable to not want to clog block space, to have block space be near free. It makes sense. But at the end of the day, Bitcoiners were struggling with this idea of how to get miners get paid, right? And I think if you saw the report just a couple of days ago, last quarter, second quarter of the year, miners earned as much as the entire year of 2022. And that is almost, 100% responsible because of ordinals, right? That's an ordinals driven event. And so while in one way, yes, it does clog, it does place value on the block space itself. At the end of the day, it's good for miners, and what's good for miners is good for, the security of Bitcoin. We all agree on that. So, I think it's even the most hardcore Bitcoin maxis, it's impossible to go back now. Like ordinals are a decided thing. Ordinals are not going away. And so, yeah, that's how I'd push back on that.
Do you think we'll hear the F word conversation? Fork?
Never.
At some point?
No way. They would lose. I mean, the maxis, if they did that, would their fork of Bitcoin would go the way of the dodo. Like they do not have social consensus. So
I wish they did.
yeah, it would
be
fun to see. It would be fun to see. I'd be down for that, man. We'd have some great Twitter spaces, man. It would be amazing.
Yeah, that would be all-time high drama. But But yeah, I know we're at the top of the hour. We usually keep it going, BitGod, but I do want to be respectful of your time. So if you need to jump off or anything, but we really do appreciate you coming by. I learned a lot. It was my first time inscribing something when I got OXBT, and I didn't even think I was going to get any. And I was, it's smooth minting process, and I'm glad I tried it out. I've always been an L1 jumper. I jump around from L1, so how am I not going to try out stuff on Bitcoin? Like, it just doesn't make any sense that I wouldn't do that.
No, thank you guys so much for having me today, and looking forward to seeing you all in the future as well here.
Thanks for coming. Yeah, if you guys missed it, you can go ahead and play it back. We talked BRC-20s, OXBT, what's coming up with Redacted. So we really appreciate your time, but we're going to keep it going. We'll